My name is Reese Calloway. I was 29 years old that spring, and the thing I remember best about the last Sunday in April is the weight of a brass coin in my dress pocket and a 6-year-old named Eli tugging on my sleeve to ask, in front of the whole class, whether it was really true that I used to be a soldier. I told him it was true. He wanted to know if I ever got scared. I told him yes, all the time, and that being scared and being brave turned out to be the same room with two different doors. He did not understand that, and I did not expect him to, and he went back to coloring a paper cross with a green crayon because green was the only color left in the bucket. The morning light came through the tall windows of the Sunday school wing at Coldwater First Baptist and landed on a table full of children who trusted me completely, and I stood there with my hand around a coin I had once thrown as hard as I could into the dark, and I thought, not for the first time, that I had no business being this happy. But it took me almost 4 years to stand in that room without wanting to run out of it, and there was a night behind a bar on the edge of Coldwater, Tennessee, where I lay on the wet asphalt of the parking lot and told God to his face that he was a liar and a coward, and I meant every word. If you have ever come home from something that took the faith clean out of you, if you have ever sat in a church parking lot with the engine running and could not make your hand open the door, if somebody ever kept loving you through a season when you gave them every good reason to quit, then this is the story I have been getting ready to tell for a long time. My name is Reese, and I want to tell you how I got carried back. Before we go on, if stories about the long way home mean something to you, take a second and subscribe to Bridges of Grace, because we tell these true-to-life stories every week for people who know that grace usually shows up slower than we want and stronger than we deserve. I grew up 3 miles outside Coldwater in a white house with a porch my daddy never finished painting, and I was raised in the same Baptist church my mother was baptized in and her mother before her. Faith in our house was not a Sunday thing, it was a weekday thing. My mother, Loretta, prayed out loud while she cooked, not fancy prayers, just a running conversation with the Lord about the price of ground beef and my brother's grades and whether the Hendersons down the road were ever going to speak to each other again. I learned to pray the way I learned to breathe, without deciding to. I could quote long stretches of scripture by the time I was 10, and I won a little ribbon at Vacation Bible School 2 summers running for it, and I believed, with the whole uncomplicated heart of a child, that God was good and that he was watching, and that nothing could happen to me that he had not already thought about and permitted for some reason I would understand later. I remember being small and sick one winter, with a fever that scared my parents, and my mother sitting on the edge of my bed all night with her hand on my chest, praying so softly it was almost a hum, and I remember believing, in the certain way a child believes, that her hand and her prayer were the two things holding the fever down, and that as long as she kept them there, nothing bad could get in. When the fever broke near morning, I did not think we had gotten lucky. I thought God had heard my mother, the way I thought he always did. It would be a long time before I understood that some mothers sit on the edge of a bed all night with their hand on a chest and pray just as hard, and the fever does not break, and that the mystery of which is the exact thing that would one day take the ground out from under me. There is a coin I need to tell you about now, because it comes back later, and I want you to be carrying it the way I carried it. My Uncle Ray served in the First Gulf War, and he gave me a challenge coin when I was 15, a heavy brass thing worn smooth on one side, and he told me a soldier keeps a coin like that, so she never forgets she belongs to something bigger than herself. I kept it in a jewelry box for years. I did not know then that I would one day squeeze it hard enough to leave its edges printed in my palm, in a place with no name I could pronounce, or that I would throw it away, or that a child would one day hand it back to me and change everything. Keep the coin in your mind. I need you to remember it. I joined the Army the fall after I turned 19, and I want to be honest that I did not join because I was running from anything. I joined because I loved my country, in the plain way you love it when you grow up in a small town with a flag on every porch, and because I wanted to be part of something that mattered, and because I believed that a person of faith was supposed to serve. My mother cried at the recruiting office and then wiped her face and told me she would pray me all the way there and all the way back. My daddy shook my hand like I was a man, which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. At my going-away supper, my grandmother made me hold still while she pressed her palm flat against my forehead and asked the Lord to keep me in the hollow of his hand, and I let her, and I believed it would work. I trained as a medic, which meant that when I finally deployed, my job was not to take life, but to hold it in place until somebody with more training could take over. I was proud of that. I thought it fit me. I was the girl who prayed over the wounded before I ran the line into their arm, quietly, so nobody would think I was strange, and for a long while my faith and my work sat easy together like two hands folded. There was an older sergeant early on who caught me at it, murmuring over a young man with a bad leg while I worked, and I braced for him to make fun of me, and instead he waited until I was done and the boy was stable, and then he said only, "Keep doing that, it steadies your hands," and walked off. I did not know if he meant the prayer helped God or just helped me, and I did not care, because in those days I could not tell the difference and did not need to. My faith was a working thing then, a tool in the kit, as real and as useful as the tourniquet and the gauze, and I used it the same way, without ceremony, dozens of times, and it never once occurred to me that it was the kind of thing that could run out. I met Danny Reyes my first week in country. She was a medic too, from El Paso, loud where I was quiet, and she wore a matching challenge coin from her own unit on a bootlace around her neck, and the first thing she ever said to me was that anybody who kept a coin like that could not be all bad. We became the kind of friends you only become in a place like that, where the ordinary walls between people fall down because there is no time and no point in keeping them up. Danny had a saying she used whenever one of us got wound too tight, whenever the fear started climbing up the back of your throat. She would knock her shoulder into yours and say, "Nobody walks point forever, Reese. Somebody always spells you." She meant it about the watch, about the patrols, about the long nights. I did not understand for years that she meant it about the whole of a life. Danny carried a little spiral notebook in her cargo pocket, and in it she kept a list of everybody she was praying for back home, names and one line each about what they needed, and she added to it constantly, and once she caught me watching her write in it by flashlight, and she told me, matter of fact, that she could not carry all these people in her head, so she carried them on paper, and that was a kind of praying too, keeping the list. I thought that was a strange thing for a person to do in a war zone. I have that notebook now. Her mother sent it to me a year after, wrapped in tissue paper with a note that said Danny would have wanted the medic to have it, and my own name is in it. On the last page she wrote, with one line under it that I am not going to read to strangers, and I keep it in a drawer and I do not open it often, but I know it is there, and knowing it is there has gotten me through nights that the drinking never could. We were good together, Danny and I. We had a whole shorthand. We fought about music and about whether her city or mine had better food, and about nothing at all, the way you fight with a sister, and in 11 months she became the closest friend I have ever had in my life, and I want you to feel the size of that before I tell you the next part, because the size of what I lost is the whole reason the losing broke me the way it did. I am not going to walk you through everything I saw, because some of it is not mine to hand to strangers, and some of it I have worked very hard to set down, and I am not going to pick it back up for a video. But I have to tell you about the day, because it is the hinge that everything else in my life swings on. It was late in the summer, in the worst of the heat, and we were coming back in from a place we had gone to help, and there was a device buried in the road that nobody saw. I was 3 vehicles back. I want you to understand that faith did not leave me all at once that day. It left me in the 4 minutes I spent in the dirt with my friend, doing everything I had been trained to do, everything, with my whole heart and both my hands, praying the entire time in a voice that did not sound like mine, and watching it not be enough. Danny died with her coins still on the bootlace around her neck, and my thumb pressed to a place my thumb could not fix, and a 19-year-old private named Wyatt Tibbs died 40 feet away before I could get to him, and I knelt in that road and felt something inside my chest that had been lit my whole life go quietly and completely out. I did not know then that the same coin I curled my fist around in that road, the one my uncle gave me, would one day be pressed back into my hand by a child in a Sunday school room, and that on that morning I would finally understand what Danny had been trying to tell me all along. That afternoon, I only knew that I had asked God to save her with everything in me, and He had not, and that whatever I had believed since I was small had been a story people told themselves, so the dark would seem less dark. They flew us home in stages, and somewhere over the ocean I made a decision I did not announce to anyone. I decided I was done. Not done with the army yet, I still had time to serve, and I served it. Done with God, done with the whole gentle lie of Him. I came back to Coldwater on leave, and my mother had a banner on the porch, and the church had a supper planned, and I sat through it with my face arranged into something that looked like gratitude. And inside, I was a burned-out building with the windows still in place, so nobody could see the ceiling had fallen in. My grandmother put her palm on my forehead again and prayed, and I stood there and felt nothing but a low anger that she still could, that she had the nerve to, that she had not been in that road. Before I go on, let me ask you something, because I know some of you are further along in a season like this than I was, and some of you are just walking into one. Has a stranger's kindness ever reached you after you had already decided that nobody was really good, that people only pretended, or have you had to be carried by other people through a stretch you could not walk on your own? I would love for you to tell me in the comments because I read them and because I think we forget how many of us are quietly holding a burned-out building behind our faces. And if you have not yet, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss where this one goes, because I promise you it does not end in that road. I left the army the next year and came home to Coldwater for good, and that is when the part I am least proud of started, and I am going to tell you about it plainly, because I think the pretty version helps nobody. I started drinking. Not the way people joke about it, the way that has a purpose. I drank to get the 4 minutes in the road to stop playing, and it worked for about 2 hours a night, and then it stopped working and I drank more. I got a job at a distribution warehouse out on the highway, and I did it well enough during the day, and I came apart at night. I picked fights. I put my fist through the drywall in my own kitchen and told my mother a shelf had fallen. I got asked to leave a bar out on the county line for standing on a chair and telling a room full of strangers exactly what I thought of a God who let a girl from El Paso bleed out in a road for no reason at all. I was not sad in a way that made people want to comfort me. I was mean in a way that made them want to get away. And I understood that, and part of me was glad of it, because if everyone left, then no one could be taken from me again. It went on like that through a whole year and into the next, and I want you to feel the length of it, because the drop does not happen in a day. There was the Thanksgiving I did not come to the table at all and let my mother eat with an empty chair beside her. There was the Christmas Eve I sat in my truck in the church parking lot with the engine running and the heater on, watching the candles come up in the windows through the glass, unable to make my hand open the door, and I sat there through the whole service and drove home before the lights came back on and never told a soul I had been there. There was the spring my little niece was baptized, and I stood in the very back of the sanctuary in sunglasses, because I could not stand for anyone to see my face, and I left before the dinner. I marked the calendar of that town in absences. Every holiday had a hole in it exactly my shape, and I told myself I preferred it, that the hole was cleaner than the ache, and I was lying, and I think everyone knew I was lying except me. My mother did not leave. She kept a plate warm for me on the nights I did not come home, and she never once asked where I had been, and every single morning, hungover and hollow, I would come into the kitchen and find her praying out loud over the coffee pot, the same running conversation with the Lord she had kept up my whole life, and it made me want to scream. I told her once to stop. I told her the praying was a waste of breath, and that I had watched her God do nothing, while better people than either of us died in the dirt. She set down her cup and looked at me with a steadiness I did not have the strength to break, and she said, "I will make you a deal, Reese. You do not have to believe. I will believe for both of us until you can." And she picked her cup back up and kept praying. I hated her a little for that. I know now it was the truest thing anyone said to me in those years. The church did not give up on me either, which at the time I experienced as a kind of harassment. Casseroles kept appearing on our porch. The ladies of the church left them without knocking. because they had heard I was hard to be around and they were not wrong. Brother Dale, our pastor, a soft-spoken man named Dale Whitfield, who had buried more of this town than anyone alive, would find me in the parking lot at the hardware store and ask after me with no agenda I could detect, and I gave him nothing, and he kept doing it. There was an old deacon named Earl Buckhalter who had served in Vietnam as a young man and lost most of his hearing and half his friends to it, and Earl took to sitting near me at the few church functions my mother dragged me to, not talking, just sitting, the way you sit near a spooked animal so it learns your shape is not a threat. The first real thing Earl ever said to me, months into all that sitting, was not about God at all. We were on folding chairs at the edge of a church supper, and everyone else was loud, and he leaned over and said, in that flat, too loud voice deaf men use, "The ones who came back never talked to the ones who did not, so I will not make you." And then he went back to his pie. I could have kissed him for it. It was the first sentence anybody had said to me in a year that did not have a hook hidden in it, and I think that one sentence is the reason I let Earl anywhere near me for what came after. He had thrown his own coin in that same river, he told me once, long after, and had gone in after it in January with the ice at the edges, and had sat on the bank shaking and cussing at a sky he was not sure was listening, and had come home and kept coming to church anyway, for 40 years, mostly because his wife was buried in the yard behind it, and he liked to be near her on Sundays. Earl did not have his faith all tidied up. That is exactly why I could stand to be near it. The people whose faith had never been broken frightened me. Earl's had been broken and glued back crooked, and it held, and I could see the cracks, and the cracks were the only thing about religion I trusted in those days. I did not want any of it. I want to be clear about that. Their kindness felt like a debt I had not agreed to and could not pay, and the more they refused to give up on me, the worse a person I felt like for having nothing to give them back. This is where I have to tell you about Caleb, though he would tell you he does not belong in a story about faith, that he did not do anything, that he just kept showing up, and that is exactly the point, so I am telling it my way. Caleb Merrick ran the transmission shop his father had run before him, out on the Sevierville Road, and he taught the boys in the 3rd and 4th grade Sunday school class, and I met him because I wrecked my truck. I would like to tell you it was not my fault. It was entirely my fault. I put my truck into the ditch on the Coldwater Road one night, coming back from the county line with more in me than any person should drive on, and by the grace of a God I did not believe in, I did not hit anybody and I did not hurt anybody, but myself and a fence post belonging to a man named Toomey. I sat in that ditch with the engine ticking and the airbag dust settling, and I started to laugh, because it seemed to me the perfect summary of my whole life, and then I started to cry, and I could not have told you which one I was doing by the time the headlights came up behind me. It was Caleb. He was coming back late from a job, and he saw the truck in the ditch, and he stopped, the way people around here still stop, and he climbed down into the wet grass in his good clothes, and he did not smell the liquor on me, or if he did not say a word about it. He asked me if anything was broken. I said only everything. He got me out, and he sat me in the cab of his truck with the heater on, and he called Earl Buckhalter, of all people, because Earl had a tow rig, and the two of them pulled my truck out of Toomey's fence in the dark, and Caleb drove me home and did not say one thing about God the entire time. He walked me to the porch. My mother came to the door in her robe. And this is the thing I could not get past for weeks afterward, the thing that sat in me like a splinter working its way toward the surface. Caleb told my mother I had slid on the wet road. He lied for me. He looked my praying mother in the eye and gave her a reason to sleep, and then he drove away, and he never once, not that night and not for a long time after, asked me for anything at all. I found out later that Caleb paid Toomey for his fence himself, and never told me and would have taken it to his grave if Toomey had not mentioned it at the feed store a year on. I found out that Earl put $400 toward my truck repair through the shop and had Caleb tell me it was a discount. These men, who I had given nothing to, who I had insulted from the top of a bar chair, quietly closed ranks around the worst version of me and asked for no credit and no confession and no change. I did not understand it. It made me angry before it made me anything else. because I had built my whole grief on the idea that the world was a machine with nobody good running it, and here were 3 or 4 people in a small town in Tennessee running around behind me, patching holes I had punched in my own life, and it did not fit. It did not fit anywhere in what I believed. I laid awake with it. I could not make it be about pity, and I could not make it be about religion, because none of them preached at me, and the only category I had left for it was one I had thrown out in a road overseas, and I was not ready, not nearly ready, to pick that category back up. Let me stop for just a moment. If someone is doing that for you right now, if there is a person or a handful of people who keep showing up for you when you have given them every reason on earth to stop, I want you to consider that this might be the shape the answer comes in. Not a feeling, not a sign in the sky. People being stubbornly good at you until you run out of ways to explain it. If this is landing somewhere true, subscribe to Bridges of Grace and stay with me, because what happened next is the part I still cannot tell without stopping to catch my breath. Caleb did not ask me out. That is not the kind of man he is. What he did was find small reasons for me to be near ordinary goodness, without any pressure attached to it. He needed a hand at the shop one Saturday, and had heard I was good with my hands, which was true, and he paid me fair and did not make it weird. His Sunday school class was building a set of shelves for the church library, and he could use somebody who knew how to run a saw straight, and I did not have to come to the service. He said I could just come do the shelves. So I came on a Saturday to a church I would not enter on a Sunday, and I ran the saw straight, and 8 or 9 little boys watched me do it like I had hung the moon, and one of them, a small serious child named Eli, followed me around the whole afternoon asking questions. His daddy was overseas, Caleb told me quietly while we swept up, deployed. Eli had it in his head that anybody who had been a soldier could tell him whether his daddy was safe, and he had been waiting all morning to ask me, and he was too shy, and would I mind? I looked at that little boy holding a broom bigger than he was, waiting on a woman he did not know to tell him something about the one thing he was afraid of in all the world, and something in my chest that I had thought was dead all the way through gave a single hard kick. I did not fix it that day. I want to be honest with you, there was no scene where I fell to my knees in the sawdust and got my faith back. What there was, over the next long while, was a slow return of things I had lost, one at a time, so quietly I did not notice them coming back until they were already there. I started going to the shop on Saturdays. I started helping with the boys, because Caleb needed the help, and because Eli was there, and because being near children who were not afraid of the dark yet did something to me I did not have words for. Caleb and I worked side by side for the better part of a year before either of us said one word about what was growing between us, and I have come to believe that year of silence was the kindest thing a man ever did for me. He let me be a person before he let me be a girlfriend. He learned how I took my coffee, which was black and bitter as tar in those days, and he learned which subjects to walk around, and he learned that if I went quiet at the mention of a road, he should just hand me a wrench and let me work it out with my hands, and he learned all of it without ever making me explain myself. He brought a dented steel thermos to the shop every Saturday and poured me the first cup out of it before he poured his own, every single week, and it became a thing I counted on without letting myself notice I was counting on it. Once, deep in the winter, I did not show up for 3 Saturdays running because I had slipped and gone back to the county line bar, and I was ashamed to let him see me, and I braced myself for a lecture, and when I finally dragged myself back in, he just poured the first cup out of the thermos and handed it to me and said, "Transmission is stuck, glad you are here," and picked up where we had left off like no time had passed at all. I sat in his shop that morning with a hot cup in my hands and my throat tight, and I understood that I had been waiting my whole life to be treated exactly that gently and had never once known it. I stopped drinking, not all at once, not because anyone asked, but because I kept needing to drive kids and lumber around, and I did not want to be that woman near those children, and 1 week turned into 2, and Earl, who noticed everything and said almost nothing, started saving me the seat next to him at the church suppers again, and I let him. My mother kept believing for both of us and stopped mentioning it, which was its own kind of grace. I want to tell you about the low point that came in the middle of all this, because it did not go in a straight line, and I think the straight line stories do people harm. There was a homecoming Sunday that fall. The big one. The whole town. Dinner on the grounds, and my mother asked me to come. And I came sober, but I came raw. And somebody I did not know well, a woman with good intentions and no idea, cornered me by the dessert table and told me she just knew that the Lord had brought me home safe for a reason, that everything happened for a reason, that Danny and that boy Tibbs must have been part of some plan, and I felt the whole burned-out building behind my face catch fire. I said something to her I will not repeat here. I said it loud. The tables went quiet. I told a churchyard full of people, most of whom had prayed for me by name, exactly what I thought of a plan that included a girl from El Paso dying in a road, and I threw down the plate I was holding, and I walked out through the middle of all of them, and I got in my truck, and I drove out to the river. This is the night with the coin. I had carried my uncle's challenge coin in my pocket since I got home, the way you keep worrying at a sore tooth, and I sat on the hood of my truck by the river in the dark, and I took it out, and I turned it over, and I thought about Danny wearing hers on that bootlace to the very end, believing something bigger than herself, right up until a road took her, and I hated the coin, and I hated what it stood for, and I hated that I could not stop carrying it. So I stood up and I threw it. I threw it as hard as I have ever thrown anything, out over the black water, and I screamed at the sky that he could have it, that he could have all of it, that I was done being lied to. And then I stood there, in the sudden quiet, with my arms still up, and I felt the most terrible loneliness I have ever felt in my life, worse than the road, because in the road I had at least still been angry at someone, and now I had thrown the someone away too, and there was nothing left to be angry at, just a cold river and a woman standing beside it with empty hands. Headlights came up the river road. It was Earl. My mother had called him, she told me later, and Earl had known where to look because it was where the veterans in this town go when they cannot be around people. The river, he had been going there himself for 40 years. He did not climb up on the hood with me, and he did not preach. He walked down to the water with a big flashlight, and he started going along the bank, slow, sweeping the light back and forth over the rocks at the edge, and I asked him what in the world he was doing, and he said, "Without looking up, you threw something." "I did not throw it far enough," was what he did not say, but the river was low that time of year, and the bank was wide, and Earl Buckhalter, 71 years old and half deaf, spent the better part of an hour on his hands and knees in the mud with a flashlight, while I sat on my truck and cried, and he found it. He found the coin. He climbed back up the bank, soaked to the knees, and he did not hand it to me. He put it in his own shirt pocket, and he buttoned the pocket, and he said, "I am going to keep this for you until you want it back. You will want it back." I have thrown mine in that same river twice, and I always came back for it. And he drove me home. I sat with that for weeks, exactly the way the good things always came to me in those years, sideways and slow and impossible to argue with. I could not make Earl's hour in the mud be about anything but love, and I could not make my mother believing for both of us be about anything but love, and I could not make Caleb lying to protect me or paying for a fence be about anything but love. And one gray Tuesday morning it occurred to me, standing at the coffee pot in my mother's kitchen, that I had been demanding God prove himself to me with a sign in the sky, and that the whole time he had been proving himself to me with people, stubbornly, patiently, in the mud by a river, and that I had been too busy watching the sky to see it. I did not fall down. I did not weep. I just stood there, with a cup going cold in my hand, and I said, out loud, in an empty kitchen, "All right." Just that, all right. It was the smallest prayer I have ever prayed, and I think it may have been the biggest. The faith did not come back the way it left. It left all at once in a road. It came back the way dawn comes, so gradual you cannot name the moment it got light. I started staying for the service after the shelves were done. I sat next to Earl. The first Sunday I made it all the way through. They sang the old hymn about it being well with your soul, the one a man wrote after he lost his little girls at sea, and Brother Dale told the story of it before they sang, how the man wrote those words while sailing over the very water that had taken his children. And I sat there next to a deaf old soldier and a mechanic who fixed transmissions and taught third graders, and I could not sing it. My voice would not do it. I got about 4 words in, and it closed up like a fist, and Earl, without a word, without even turning his head, reached into his coat and handed me his handkerchief, and I have never made it through that hymn to this day. I want you to know that. It is the one thing that never healed all the way, and I have decided to leave it that way, because Danny deserves a song I cannot finish. Let me ask you the question I most want you to sit with, before I tell you the last part, and this is the one I keep coming back to myself late at night. Who was the person who kept showing up for you when you had done nothing to earn it and everything to prevent it? Because I think that person is worth a phone call today, and I think most of us wait too long to make it, and some of us wait until it is too late. If you have someone like that, tell them. And if you have never had someone like that, I am so sorry, and I hope with everything in me that they are on their way to you right now, because they were on their way to me and I did not even know it. Subscribe to Bridges of Grace, and stay with me for the end of this, because it is the part I would have called impossible on that night by the river. The turning point, the real one, the one that took the last of it, did not come in a church. It came in Caleb's Sunday school room, on a Sunday in the winter, and I was only there because I had drifted from fixing shelves into helping, sitting in the back with the shy ones. Caleb had asked the boys to draw a picture of something they were scared of, and then a picture of somebody bigger than the thing, because that was the lesson, that we were not built to carry the whole sky by ourselves. And little Eli, whose daddy was still overseas, drew a picture of a soldier in a desert, and then on the second paper he did not draw God, he drew me. He drew a stick figure with a ponytail standing between his daddy and the dark, because in his 6-year-old understanding I was the bigger somebody. I was the one who had been where his daddy was and come back. And he brought the picture to me at the end of class, with his whole heart in his hands, and he asked me if I would pray for his daddy, because he had heard I used to pray over soldiers, and he thought maybe I still knew how. I want to tell you that I want you to understand what he was asking. He was asking me to do the exact thing I had done in the road, the thing that had not worked, the thing that had cost me everything I believed. He was asking me to pray over a soldier. And I looked at that little boy, and I looked at his drawing, and I understood all at once the way you understand something you have known for years but never let yourself say, that Danny had not been telling me a nice thing when she knocked her shoulder into mine all those years ago. Nobody walks point forever, Reese. Somebody always spells you. She was not talking about the patrol. She was telling me the whole secret of how a person survives being alive. You are not supposed to carry it alone. You were never supposed to. God does not come mostly as a rescue from the dark. He comes as the people he sends to stand the watch beside you, to spell you when your arms give out, to go down on their knees in the mud of a riverbank and find what you threw away. And I got down on the floor of that Sunday school room next to a 6-year-old, and I prayed over his daddy, out loud, in a voice that finally sounded like mine again, and it was the first time I had prayed in almost 4 years, and I did not do it, because I had figured out where God was when Danny died. I still do not know that. I did it because a child asked me to help carry something too big for him, and I finally knew that this exact thing, was the whole of what I had been made for. I went home and I did not tell anyone what had happened, because it was not a thing you announce, it was a thing you protect. I got the coin back from Earl the next Sunday. I did not ask for it. I just sat down next to him before the service, and he looked at me for a long moment, and then he unbuttoned his shirt pocket, the same pocket, and he handed me my uncle's coin, warm from being carried against his chest all those months, and he said, "Told you. That was all. Told you." And I put it in my dress pocket where it has ridden every Sunday since. Caleb and I married the following June, in the church, and Brother Dale told the story of how we met and left out the ditch and the liquor, and told it as 2 people fixing shelves, which was true in every way that mattered. My mother cried the way she cried at the recruiting office, and then wiped her face, and this time there was nothing left to pray me back from. Earl walked me down the aisle because my daddy had passed by then, and Eli was the ring bearer, and his daddy, home safe by then, God be thanked, sat in the third row in his uniform and wept openly, and I made it almost all the way through the hymn before my voice closed, and Earl, standing up front now, reached into his coat. Caleb and I have a thing we do now, on the last Saturday of every month, that grew up out of those shop mornings without either of us deciding on it. We drive out to the river, the same stretch, and we sit on the hood of his truck, and we do not always talk. Sometimes we bring Danny's notebook, and I read one name off her list, and we pray for whoever it is, even the ones I never met, even the ones who by now have surely gotten whatever it was they needed, or gone on to where they no longer need it, and it does not matter, because the praying was never really for them, the way Danny knew all along. It was for the one keeping the list. Earl comes with us sometimes, and the three of us sit on that bank where he found my coin in the mud, 3 soldiers of 3 different wars, and we do not fix each other, and we do not preach at each other, we just keep the watch a while together, and then we drive home. It is the most honest church I have ever been a part of, that riverbank, and I did not have to lose my faith to find it, but I would not have found it any other way. There is a woman in our church now, younger than me, who came back last year from her own deployment with the same burned-out building behind her face that I used to carry, and I have watched people start to whisper about her the way they once whispered about me, that she is hard to be around, that she drinks, that somebody ought to say something. And a few Sundays back I heard one of the church ladies start in on her at the coffee urn, well-meaning, worried, wrong, and I felt something rise up in me, and I walked over, and I did not say anything cruel, because Earl taught me better than that, but I stood next to that young woman where everyone could see me do it, and I put a cup of coffee in her hand, and I said, loud enough to carry, "She is sitting with me." And I watched the whispering stop. I have become the person who does the thing that was once done for me, and I did not plan it, and I did not earn it, and it is the closest thing to a miracle I have ever been part of, that the grace runs downhill like that you catch it, and you cannot help but pour it on the next one. I teach the Sunday school class now, the little ones, the 4 and 5-year-olds, the ones who are not afraid of the dark yet, and I count it the highest honor of my life to be the one who gets to stand between them and the day they find out the dark is real. I do not lie to them about it. When they ask me hard things, and they ask me hard things, small children ask the hardest questions there are, I tell them the truth, which is that bad things happen and God does not always stop them, and that the reason we are not crushed by that is that we were never meant to hold it by ourselves, that He gives us each other, that He sends people down into the mud after the things we throw away. I keep the coin in my pocket, and on the Sundays, a child finishes a memory verse with no help. I let them hold it, and I tell them it belonged to a friend of mine named Danny, a brave and funny woman from a city called El Paso, who taught me that nobody walks point forever. They do not fully understand. They will. That is what the class is for. So here is what I know now. Standing on the far side of a river I once threw my whole faith across. I used to think faith was a feeling that either stayed with you or did not, and that mine had died in a road with 2 people I loved, and that a God who let that happen was not worth the breath it took to pray to. I was wrong about nearly all of it. Faith was never mostly a feeling. It was a company of people willing to stand the watch beside you until you could stand it again yourself, and it does not come back to you as a light in the sky. It comes back to you as a mother who believes for both of you, and a mechanic who lies to protect you and never asks for thanks, and an old soldier on his knees in the mud with a flashlight, and a 6-year-old who thinks you are the bigger somebody and asks you to pray. God carried me home the whole time on the backs of people I did not deserve, and the only thing He ever asked of me in return was that when my arms were strong enough again, I would go down into the mud after somebody else. So that is what I do now, every Sunday, with a brass coin in my pocket and a room full of children who are not afraid yet. I would love to know in the comments who spelled you on your worst watch and whether you ever went back and told them what it meant. Tell them if you can. And if you are still down in that road, still angry at a sky that went quiet on you, I am not going to argue you out of it. I am just going to tell you that somebody is already on their way to you in the dark with a flashlight, and that you are going to want that coin back, and that it is going to be well, in the end, with your soul. Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe to Bridges of Grace, and I will see you next week.